Coming up this week on Sporting Journal Radio.
Because none of our WMAs are identical to any other. And what we try to do is customize the grazing or the haying.
You know, when that water starts getting chillier, that jig bite starts kicking in pretty darn good. And that's the main way.
Who pays for all that fencing and who puts that all in? Is that then, is that the rancher, the farmer? I fish, I hunt, and always will. Broadcasting from the Eau Claire Outdoor Studios. Presented by OnX. Know where you stand with OnX. We're not just a radio show anymore. This is Sporting Journal Radio. That's right. Welcome to the show. My name is Brett Amundsen. Thank you for tuning in on the network on this radio station right here by downloading the podcast at sportingjournalradio.com or wherever you get your favorite podcasts, or maybe subscribing to our YouTube channel. Thank you very much. Dan Amundsen is with us as always. What's up, Dan?
What's up? I don't know what to say. I had something planned, but you didn't set it up right. So we'll save that for another week. No,
that's Dan Amundsen right over there. How you doing, Dan?
I'm greater than the sun.
Okay. Well, you got to tell me you need a little setup sometimes.
It's not as good if it's not organic. It's got to come up organically.
All right, David, how would you like me to introduce you?
Just a normal way, I guess.
Well, if you'd actually done it the normal way, it would have been organic.
Well, I'm trying not to do the same thing every time. It's got to change it up every once in a while, Dan.
Don't.
Keep you on your toes.
That's right. David Eckhart, what's happening?
Not too much.
All right, very nice. You did some deer hunting, bow hunting in the Dakotas. We're going to ask you how that went coming up. We'll talk about our dove opener experience, also our Minnesota early teal opener. If you got out for geese or teal or doves, we'd love to see the pictures. Share them, comment below, or put them on our social media pages. We'd appreciate it. Or just tell us what you think about the seasons. If it was too hot, if you don't like early teal, if you like early teal, we'd like to hear your opinions on that. Comment below on that. We also have Greg Hoch with us. So a couple weeks ago or last week, I don't even remember what show it was now, we talked about a viral video going around on social media about a guy on a WMA and not happy with the fact that there was cattle grazing on it, new cattle fencing up around it. So we wanted to get to the bottom and figure out what is the emergency haying and grazing and conservation grazing, what happens in Minnesota. So Greg Hoch is going to join us. He's the Prairie Habitat Supervisor with the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. He'll break down that, and we'll talk about prairie chickens and timber doodles and some other birds around Minnesota coming up with Greg in just a little bit. Also, Joe Henry will give us the latest from Lake of the Woods. But first, Dan, who are the sponsors? Are you ready?
Live Target. Just shut up. Live Target. Match the hatch at livetargetlures.com this summer. Lake of the Woods Tourism. Lake of the Woods is the Walleye capital. Plan a trip for this fall, summer, or winter.
It's September, Dan.
It's still summer. Plan a trip at lakeofthewoodsmn.com. Haybell Heights Campground and Resort at Devil's Lake. Book a trip to Devil's Lake, North Dakota at haybellheights.com. Ottertail Lakes Country. Find your inner otter at ottertaillakescountry.com. And Prairie Sportsman. We have a new season coming up this winter. Watch episodes anytime at the Prairie Sportsman YouTube channel.
Some really cool stuff coming up for Prairie Sportsman. In fact, we're going to be filming a fishing event in October down on the Mississippi River. I apparently, sometimes I feel like southeast Minnesota isn't a part of Minnesota, it seems like, or at least for us where we are. You don't hear about things down there as often. It's a beautiful part of the state. Hunting, obviously, is very good, and fishing on the river is really good. And there's a big bass tournament. Normally takes place, in June? May?
Early May. Yeah, it's like the week before inland fishing opener. But not this year.
It was flooded this year.
They canceled it because of high water, which probably is a smart move. I wouldn't want it. I was not looking forward to being on the river in flood conditions. I know there were some other tournaments, I think, held a little further down river that weekend that went on without a hitch, but I think smart move to move it to fall. And it's going to be gorgeous down there now this time of year.
Oh, yeah. I honestly can't wait. But it is a fundraiser for St. Jude's, so we are going to be telling you more about that in the next couple of weeks, not only on this show, but we'll be filming it for Prairie Sportsman coming up during the new season starting in January. I nominated for some more Emmys this year. Pioneer PBS nominated for 22 Upper Midwest Emmy Awards for the show's Compass, Postcards, and your favorite outdoor show, Prairie Sportsman. Also my favorite. I'm a little biased, though. That's right. David, it was 1 billion degrees while we were out there dove and teal hunting this weekend. You were sitting in a tree stand or
Crawling through a bean field.
Oh, I did see that. You did send one snap. So you were actually crawling through the bean field.
Yeah, that's where all the deer wanted to be.
How'd that go?
I got real close. I had 4 different pretty nice bucks, all at different points under 60 yards. A couple probably under 20, but just didn't make it happen. But I was shaking.
Man, well, that's a problem. Like I understand how you could crawl enough through a bean field to get close to deer out there, but trying to draw back a bow and not get busted without some sort of way to cover yourself up, because I'd assume once you popped up and drew your bow back, you probably bumped them if you got to that far anyway.
Yeah, I crawled in on some, and some were just feeding, so they'd put their head down. So there would have been an opportunity to draw back while their head was down. Just the way the land was set up, the contours, and
Oh, you could have got on them.
yeah, but it just, they were walking away from me or would get out too far before I had a chance to draw back. The last one got spooked by a truck on the road, so.
What nerve of that truck guy driving that truck?
How dare that guy
Does
doing
he know-
his job?
Don't you see me crawling through this bean field? I started 3 hours ago.
Yeah,
I made it 50 yards. Have you ever done that before?
not in a bean field like that, no.
I've always wanted to do the cornfield walk, standing corn on a real windy day with my bow. Have you ever done that before?
I've never done it. I've always wanted to, just like you, but it just never has worked out for me.
Yeah. I had one time where it was a perfect setup. There was a nice buck, and I could see him walking on, the upwind side of the cornfield. And I was like, oh, I could easily sneak in there and sneak in on him, but I had some place to be.
I do regret taking the knee pads out of my pants, though. Man, my knees were sore for like 2 days.
So many jokes.
We dove hunted on Friday, and we were set up on the edge of standing corn. So we were sitting in the standing corn, looking over a part that had been dug already. And I think I parked the truck, and as I was on my way back, it was legal shooting time, and some doves were already coming in. Dan and Wade were out there hunting, and some doves were already coming in. So I ducked down on the edge of the corn real quick, right into these tiny little, they're like sandbirds almost, these tiny little birds, like 10 of them, right on my kneecap. Immediately, just like center punched my knee with these burrs, and then all day I was just picking them off my legs for the rest of the day.
Those are the worst.
But dove hunting wasn't terrible, Dan. You got to shoot a couple doves out there.
I had a great time.
Yeah.
It was easy. That's what I love about dove hunting. It's you can make it so easy, and you can sit there in shorts and a tank top if you want. I didn't. I sat there in pants and a t-shirt or whatever. We just sat in some standing corn and whacked some doves, missed some doves, ate some doves, and it was easy. We woke up, 5:30. We were in the field by 5:45.
That's great.
We had such a long drive. We were shooting birds by 6:30, whatever. So it was a great time. I love it because you can just sit there and talk to whoever you're with and not have to be super camoed, super quiet, and just hang out. You shoot some birds, great. If you don't, whatever. Who cares? They're doves. It's not a big deal.
Yeah. And I didn't care if we shot, a full limit. Obviously, I just wanted to shoot some to put on the grill, get the shotgun warmed up, get Tiny some retrieves, and get you guys shooting some birds. Get your dad shooting some birds. I know we do that all the time. But the best part I think about that teal hunt, Dan, is we weren't far from an area the dove hunt. The best part of that dove hunt is we were near an area where we might teal hunt, but hadn't scouted too much. And as we were sitting there watching doves, like, oh, there's a flock of teal. Oh, there's another flock of teal. Maybe we should teal hunt tomorrow. So that's what we did. And there was more ducks around than I was expecting there to be.
It seems with ducks in a slough, that's always how it is, right? You'll scout it like, there's like 30 in there, and then you show up the next morning and you're like, whoa, there's 200 all of a sudden in the decoys in the morning. So you almost kind of count for that. But yeah, we saw a lot of ducks, and the teal season you can't shoot. And we talked about this in our latest Fish Hunt Forever YouTube video. It's out now. But teal season, right? You can't shoot till sunrise, and we got there a half hour before. So we got a great show, and a lot of ducks. We could have shot a lot of ducks. We might have had a nice quick limit if we could have shot right at sunrise or a half hour before. But waiting till sunrise, we got a quick show, and then like teal, flight was kind of over, so we picked away at a few and shot a lot of ducks, but not what it could have been. But there were a ton of birds back there.
Yeah,
fun.
It was wild, and we wanted to be out there before the half hour before because we knew teal get into the spread early. So we wanted to try to be in there in case, they would still be in there when legal shooting time came. And water swatting, no matter how you look at water swatting, it's a lot more acceptable these days, than it used to be. And particularly during the early teal season, when identification is so important that a lot of times we'll let the teal land or let them swim into the decoys, because that happens too. But
are you okay over
excuse me.
Jeez.
Recording this at lunchtime is probably a bad idea. So we shoot some of the birds on the water, or let them get in and then jump them and shoot them off the water as they get up, whatever the case may be. So we wanted to get in there early, and I went and parked the truck, and you two were in the blind already. And as I was walking up to the blind, I could hear
the band. You two, the band was in the blind.
The band was in the blind. Yes, yeah. I was walking up, and I could hear teal in the decoys. So I was like, well, I don't want to walk into the blind and bust these birds out so these guys can shoot them. So I was sitting there waiting, and all of a sudden, like, another flock of birds showed up and landed. And then all of a sudden, there's about 15 minutes to go before legal shooting time, and I heard just a heavy, heavy barrage from, I don't know, a mile or two south of us. And I was like, it's not legal shooting time for ducks yet. They could have been shooting geese. They could have been shooting doves. But right after that, a flock of about 40 teal showed up. So maybe they're related, maybe not. But I didn't get to see them. Dan, you got to see them. I just heard it. And the first thing I heard was the air. Like the air of a 40 plus strong group of teal flying. You hear them cut the air when they come over. And they were so low to the water, I couldn't see them over the cattails. And I heard them come through, and then you hear the splashdown in the wings as they land. It sounded cool. How did it look?
So cool. Like, what do you want me to say?
I didn't know if you were going to expand
awful.
on that.
Well, I was, and then you just started to laugh.
Go ahead.
So, anyways, if I can continue.
Yeah.
I forgot what I was going to say.
It was so cool.
Cool story, bro.
Cool. Who's that guy?
I don't know. It was good though. We had a fun time out there, and then we did just throw the doves and the teal on the grill, and had a really nice meal, and we did film it for the Fish Hunt Forever YouTube channel. So if you want to see our early Minnesota teal opener vlog video, go to the Fish Hunt Forever YouTube channel to watch that right now. And David, that night, I think it was Sunday night or Monday night, I don't remember, some point over the weekend, all of a sudden my trail cameras started going off. I'm like, oh, that's a new buck. That's a new buck. Well, that's a bigger buck than I've seen. And I don't know if it was all the activity, like all the teal hunters going into the sloughs or the dove hunters going into the fields. I don't know if that got the deer moving around, because, I mean, it was 100 degrees. You wouldn't think there'd be a ton of movement.
Right.
I know it's September, so the bucks are going to start to move a little bit anyway, but I think it had to be a lot of that hunter activity kind of pushing them out of their home areas.
I don't know, because I had the same thing. I had deer in my food plots all night, and they're starting to drop velvet. And the last night that I had a lot of deer, a lot of bigger bucks. The bucks I've been watching, and they were sparring. You could see them.
Oh, cool.
Kind of sparring. I'm excited to go pull that card and look at the videos just to see if they were just touching horns or if they were actually kind of fighting a little bit or what's going on there. But I suppose it's getting to be that time of year where they're trying to figure out who's the strongest and who needs to go find a new area.
I mean, I guess we are talking about the first week of September.
Yeah.
I mean, things are probably starting to happen. It's the best time of the year, man. Mm-hmm. It doesn't feel like it out there yet, but things are things are definitely starting to happen right now. All right, so fishing is going to start getting better. Hunting obviously is here. We're going to talk about both of these things. Coming up, Greg Hoch is the Prairie Habitat Supervisor with the DNR. We got Greg on the way. We'll talk about emergency haying and grazing and some other information about prairie chickens and sharptails and woodcock and more. And Joe Henry's got a Lake of the Woods report, all coming up here on Sporting Journal Radio.
852 million acres of public land, 147 million private properties, all in the palm of your hand. The #1 hunting GPS app just got better. With hundreds of custom map layers, 3D and topographic maps, you can easily scout on the road or at home before you go. And now you can get important weather details, CWD detection, and even know what crops have been planted where. Get the most trusted hunting GPS app ever made. OnX. Know where you stand with OnX. Devil's Lake is legendary, and this summer has been legendary for walleyes. Don't miss out. Call Haybale Heights Campground and Resort today to book one of their modern cabins on East Bay. The cabins are furnished with a full bathroom, kitchen, and all the amenities like high-speed internet, and are clean following CDC guidelines. Staying at Haybale Heights gives you full access to a private boat launch, fish cleaning station, and beach area. Learn more at haybaleheights.com. That's haybaleheights.com. Plan your trip to legendary Devil's Lake today.
All right, this is Sporting Journal Radio. I'm Brett Amundsen. Thanks for watching or listening to the show wherever you are right now. Our guest is Joe Henry from Lake of the Woods Tourism. Joe, how you doing, man?
Hey, guys, I'm doing good. How are you guys?
I'm doing well. It's whispering Joe Henry a little bit there almost. I know you're out and about conducting some business right now on location. What's going on up at Lake of the Woods right now, Joe?
Well, tell you what, it's transition time. It's September, and we've had such warm weather that everything is still kind of in that summer mode. So we're like I just did the fishing report, bringing lots of nice coolers of walleyes in. We're getting some big walleyes, but I'll tell you what, it's still that summer mode, and it's pulling spinners, it's pulling crankbaits. Fishing's been good overall, but boy, I tell you still got to find those fish, and once you find them, it's never a slam dunk. You still got to make them bite, and that's kind of you dial in your spinner colors, you dial in your speed, you figure out what's colored crankbaits, and then you move. If you're on fish and those fish aren't rolling, you got to make a decision at some point in time. Let's go fish another school of fish that might be more active. And if you're a little bit versatile like that and do that, it's a win. I should tell you, we were fishing recently. I was up there on a charter boat, and we were fishing a big flat, and there was other boats with us, and we were drifting this big flat, and those fish were scattered, and we were just drifting spinners, and we pick one here, we pick one there, and I tell you what, by the time you put in a few drifts, your cooler's looking pretty darn healthy. But it wasn't a slam dunk. It wasn't like whack, whack, whack. It was like, ooh, we got one now, and 10 minutes later, somebody else will catch one, and 15 minutes later, somebody else will catch one, but then you just start filling the cooler. And when those fish kind of let up a little bit, it wasn't that great. We decided, hey, let's go jumping around to a few different spots. So we went rock hopping. We went to some different structure. And boy, in one of the spots we stopped, geez, we got a smallmouth bass. We got a couple jumbo perch. We got a nice walleye and a nice auger. And then there wasn't much there. We go to the next rock, and boom, we catch 3 more fish. We're kind of putting together a day. And I think that's what you need to do.
One of those pictures that Dan put up there on the screen a little bit ago was a big pike, and that almost looked like it was a big pike out in the middle of the lake. Like how often are you bumping in? You occasionally bump into a perch or a tulipy or some other bycatch, but how often do people catch one of those out there?
Oh, it happens a lot. It happens a lot. And, a lot of those big pike, we don't get as many muskies. Once in a while we'll get a muskie out there, but there are a lot of big pike that live in that basin. And think about it. They are targeting the small, they're targeting those small saugers and those small walleyes. And I'll tell you what, they're out there for sure, especially when you're pulling cranks. When you get them on spinners, when you're pulling crankbaits, boy, I'll tell you what, it can be lights out.
So I know everybody's just anxiously awaiting the fall shiner run. That hasn't started yet?
No, but I'll tell you, so right now we still have that summer weather, but you got to remember, part of that whole transition is water temperature, but the other part of that is length of day. So our days, that's consistent, right? The length of day is consistent. We know that's getting shorter. It's just the water temp and now with looking at the temperatures in the forecast, it's going to start getting chillier. So, everything's going to start kicking in. What happens a lot of times is mid-September is when all of a sudden you hear, so-and-so is fishing the river and they whacked them. And, somebody got some shiners off the end of their dock and their nets this week, and it'll all start. And a lot of times when it starts, it's like, oh darn it, I should have fished the river last week, But it will be happening in the very near future. It does every year. It does every year. And the cool thing about it is, I just fished the river. There's already fish in the river, and it's only going to get better.
It's so similar when you think about like the waterfall migration, and in a sense, it's a migration of fish. But people talk about weather events pushing birds and hunting pressure pushing birds, and while that does have an effect, that length of day plays the largest role in migrating waterfowl. So I'm not surprised that the same thing happens with a fish like that, Joe.
Exactly right. And Mother Nature. I mean, Mother Nature is very complex, and those fish have typical movements, typical patterns. But when we say typical, there's things that aren't typical. Last year we had a record-breaking flooding in the area, and more water got pushed through that lake than has in almost history. That wasn't typical. So how is the lake bouncing back from that? Is there more forage that got pushed north? We feel like our basin's starting to get better fishing, over the last year. That's non-typical. Things are always changing, right? We had really low water this year as a rule compared to last year was record-breaking high water. Every year is different, and you just have to kind of roll the punches knowing that those traditions are there for a reason. Those traditions are there because they've happened year after year after year. How strong will the shiners run? How strong will the run of walleyes be chasing them up that river this year? Time will tell.
So, and we can talk more about this in the next couple of weeks, but when those fish start running in the river, are you going out there with a jig and a minnow? Is that going to be your first approach?
For myself personally, my first approach, if the water's warm enough, I might still pull a spinner, or I might pull a crankbait to find those fish. Now, if I know where those fish are, if I'm marking those fish on my electronics, pretty readily, with a lot of hooks, well, then I am going to start jigging them. When that water starts getting chillier, that jig bite starts kicking in pretty darn good. And that's the main way most people are catching walleyes on the Rainy River in the fall, is jigging. But I'll tell you what, don't ever underestimate the power of trolling a crankbait. Brett, you and I have pulled cranks in the spring of the year in that cold water. Mm-hmm. And you think about it, people say, well, gosh, is it too cold of water to pull crankbaits? No. I don't think it's ever too cold of water. You think about it, I mean, fish are always eating minnows. You just adjust your speed, you adjust the size of your crank, but no, I think that if I'm struggling jigging because I'm not finding fish, those fish are spread out, no problem, put on a crankbait.
Well, that's just it. You're just covering more and more water. All right. Well, it's that time of year. Some cast and blast opportunities are starting to happen up at Lake of the Woods. We're going to talk more about those opportunities next week with Joe Henry. And if they want to plan a trip for this fall to Lake of the Woods, what should they do?
Fishing's typically really good, both lake and river, you guys. And hey, check out our website. That is lakeofthewoodsmn.com.
Northern Minnesota's Walleye Factory is a year-round world-class fishing destination. The perfect getaway this summer is just a short drive to Lake of the Woods. Fish Big Traverse Bay, the Rainy River, or visit the unique Northwest Angle. To catch big fish, you have to go where the big fish are. Plan your trip to Lake of the Woods at lakeofthewoodsmn.com. That's lakeofthewoodsmn.com. Live Target, the leader in Match the Hatch, is back with new lures that also match the action. Introducing the Live Craw. The Live Craw is irresistible to bass, walleye, and other freshwater species. FTech's winner, the Ultimate Frog, looks and acts just like a swimming frog. With an exposed Ultra Point mustad hook and replaceable legs, the Ultimate Frog has 2 styles, 2 sizes, and 8 colors. And iCast and FTech's winner, the Live Shrimp, mimics a fleeing shrimp for saltwater anglers. Coming soon from Live Target.
Did you know there are more than 1,000 lakes in Otter Tail County?
Yep, and I'm gonna fish as many as I can. I'm an outdoorsy otter. Nothing beats a full day of fishing for me. The lakes of Otter Tail County give me plenty of options to lower my boat and snag the perfect catch. Not an outdoorsy otter? No problem. Otter Tail County has something for everyone. You just need to find your inner otter.
To find your inner otter, go to OttertailLakesCountry.com.
This is Sporting Journal Radio. Thanks for tuning in on the network by demand, sportingjournalradio.com, or maybe you're watching this on YouTube. Thank you very much. Please like and share this with your friends and comment below if you have a comment or a question about a topic that we're talking about, because that's how we do things around here a lot of times. Is we want to bring up topics that our listeners care about. So last week or whatever it was, 2 weeks ago, we had somebody brought up a video that was going around on social media, and it was somebody that was on a WMA, and it had new cattle fencing up around it. They had cattle on it that were grazing, and he was upset because, hey, we're paying for this public land to go hunting on. What the heck is going on here? And we made the comment that happens a lot. You know, there's some grazing opportunities out there for farmers and ranchers on some public land. There is some emergency haying operations that take place, and then we had a couple comments about people saying we weren't experts on the matter, and no, and we're not
Yeah,
exactly. We're just hunters, kind of talking about it, and obviously we've known about emergency haying and grazing for a while. And he's like, "Oh, it's not emergency grazing, man. You got, you know, it's just like it's just perfect internet." Like the way the internet works now, if somebody thinks you're an idiot, they have no problem telling you, hiding behind a keyboard. So anyway, I thought, well, you know what? Fine. We'll get an expert on and we'll break this down a little bit and find out what's going on out there when it comes to haying and grazing on some public lands, also in some CRP, and wherever Greg Hoch's wheelhouse is, we'll find out. And he is the Prairie Habitat Supervisor with the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. Greg, I'm not trying to put you on the spot at all, Greg. I just want to kind of clarify a few things out there. So I appreciate you coming on the show with us this week.
Yeah, thanks for the invite.
Yeah, you bet. You're also author of 4 books that we'll talk about, and we're going to get into some bird talk too, with when it comes to prairie chickens and woodcock and and even we could talk waterfowl too with wood ducks. It's a subject of a few of your books out there, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But if you can break down, you know, when people throw around the term emergency haying and grazing, what does that mean for people that maybe aren't experts like ourselves? What does that mean exactly?
So generally when we talk about emergency grazing or haying, and it's usually haying, it's usually in a drought situation. So for instance, in 2021, when we had the really serious drought, the Minnesota Department of Agriculture set up weekly meetings with a bunch of federal, state agencies, grazing organizations, et cetera, just so that we could kind of plan and coordinate who's doing what, where the need was, how we could collectively, among all the agencies, state and federal, shuffle resources. Generally, when you talk about emergency haying and grazing, it's quite often more focused on things like conservation reserve program fields, to a much lesser extent, public lands like wildlife management areas. However, there are opportunities created by things like this. That sounds kind of negative, but try to make the best of a situation. So, for instance, there are a number of areas we've been in a wet cycle for quite a few years. It's so wet in the spring that we can't get fire into a lot of places with our prescribed fire program, can't get equipment in there to manage. However, with that drought, a lot of our wetlands dried up, and the science shows that's actually good for wetlands in the long run. We were able to get some haying in there, get some basic disturbances onto acres that had seen very little management for quite a few years. And I do want to emphasize that our public lands in Minnesota are in no way, shape, or form a pressure valve for anybody, ranchers, etc. We made the offer if ranchers wanted to contact their local area wildlife manager and have a discussion. If that manager had some land that he or she wanted to have hayed to help meet a specific management objective, then they started working together. However, there was no mandate or anything like that thou shalt allow grazing or haying on the WMAs in your work area. It was still totally up to the area manager, and it was only allowed, just like our regular haying and grazing, only allowed if it helped the DNR and DNR staff meet specific management objectives for our habitat and wildlife.
So in that particular one, and you don't know about this specific case, but in that particular situation, it could have been a WMA that maybe was too wet to be managed effectively. And this spring, it was really wet. I mean, we had a lot of water.
Record wet.
this spring, a lot of guys, maybe it was scheduled to be burned this year, and you couldn't get in there to burn it. So once it started to dry up, the opportunity to put cattle in there for a disturbance by grazing became an option, and that may have been what happened here.
That could have been one case. It could have also been something along the lines of, we had a multi-year grazing program or plan set up for that particular unit, and that may be, put cattle on for a year, rest it for a year, put cattle back on for a year, or put them in the southwest corner in 1 year and the northeast corner in the next year. Rotate them around. So they may have been new, quote unquote, this year, but they may have been, and probably likely were part of a longer term management plan at that site.
So is that, if that happens on a specific WMA, I know a couple of the comments we got was, yeah, but it's not just 1 year. I've seen cows out here multiple years or whatever, or people fall back. It's a crutch they use. And then all of a sudden they're doing it all the time on these public lands. If they enter into some sort of grazing, conservation grazing type situation, how often, I mean, can they have them there every year? They just have to rotate them around the property? Or when you said every other year, is that something where they can come back every other year on the entire piece, or does it differ per property?
It is literally going to be different for every property because none of our WMAs are identical to any other. And what we try to do is customize the grazing or the haying to the particular site and to the particular needs at that site. As a general rule of thumb, we like to hit things fairly lightly, still leave plenty of cover. However, there may be cases where we want to go in and really hammer a site. For instance, we may want to graze an area down really heavily if it's, for instance, dominated by brome. And what we're trying to do there is really impact that brome, really knock it back hard. And then we're going to come back in next year or the following year and seed that area down with a really diverse mix of native grasses and wildflowers. I've also seen cases where we came in, we or the Fish and Wildlife Service or the Nature Conservancy came in, hit an area pretty hard, specifically because we wanted to do a tree removal project on that site. And we didn't want to be missing all the little seedlings and saplings and things like that, and it just made it easier to get around. So for a brief period of time, come in, hit it pretty hard, which then makes it easier for us to do the ultimate management plan that we're working on, the tree removal, and then obviously, pull the animals off really quickly. So again, every management plan is a little different because the site needs at every WMA are a little different.
And I know it can be frustrating as a hunter, especially if it was a piece that you really liked and spent a lot of time there, or maybe it was close to your home or something. And it can be frustrating when you go there to see that it's off limits. It's not going to be an option this year for whatever the case may be. But when that situation happens, and maybe they're only using a quarter of the section or a quarter of the property or whatever the case may be, just a part of it, hunting is still allowed on that property, right? And then how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. And we always try to get the cattle off before the hunting season starts. There may be never say never. There could be an occasion where they're out there later for, again, to meet some need. But yeah, we generally try to get them off so that, cattle aren't interfering with hunters, with dogs, etc. I also relate it to like a spring prescribed fire. The year of the fire, it's not that great for nesting habitat because all the cover's gone. However, it's going to be great brood rearing habitat for pheasants later in the summer. And in following years, it's going to be fantastic nesting habitat. So there are cases where, it may not look great this year, but we're managing for future years. There'd be the analogy of like doing a drawdown on a wetland isn't going to make for great duck hunting this fall. But once we reflood that wetland in future years, it's going to be fantastic duck hunting.
Oh, we've seen that on a few places.
Yeah,
Mouth shut.
It's, I
you know,
mean,
or
it's,
you know,
you're
ahead.
spot on, Greg. And I don't mean to interrupt you, but we've seen it happen. You know, we've been around this enough to see it happen, where it is frustrating when it's happening for a guy, and maybe he's only a weekender that only has a short time, and maybe he drove long ways and he get to a spot. I mean, that's why we talk about scouting so much. Scouting is so important, and not just for waterfowl, but scouting is so important when it comes to hunting, especially if you're putting a lot of time and effort into a short window. But you know, I've seen even around where I live, there was some pretty big habitat improvement projects going on where there was some heavy equipment rolling through some grass and cattails and just building roads through it all. And a year later, you can't even tell that those roads were there. Like the habitat came back bigger and better and thicker, and there's wildlife all over the place. So it can be frustrating in the moment, but in the long run, it's definitely for the better, done right, of course. And one other quick question about that type of situation, grazing, whether it's so there is emergency grazing, like that is an actual thing, right?
Yes, and there are a couple of different triggers. Those are generally more kind of in the area of the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, the Farm Service Agency, NRCS. We don't get super involved in that. Again, unless there's a case where we've got a producer nearby and he or she could help us, we're more than willing to talk. But
so
that's usually. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. So most of the emergency grazing would take place maybe on a private land, like on an easement,
CRP,
like CRP.
Yeah.
But so if there's grazing on a WMA or some public land, that's most likely a conservational grazing contract then, or situation.
Yeah, and I don't have any numbers for you as far as percentages and things like that. The issue with like an emergency grazing is we still need to write a grazing plan. We need to get fencing up. We need to get water taken care of. That can take a period of time. That does not lend itself well to an emergency. However, we can get a map out, talk to a producer, literally draw a line and say, if you could hay, within this area on this WMA, it would help us out. And they can get their hay cutting equipment out there. They can get those bales off quickly. It can happen. But yeah, emergency, quote unquote, not even sure I like that term. Right. Haying is going to be more prevalent than any sort of grazing on a WMA.
And we'll move on from the grazing portion, but I just have one more question about that, or two more questions, I guess. And one of the topics that came up about it was who pays for all that fencing and who puts that all in. Is that then is that the rancher, the farmer putting all that up, maybe in conjunction with the DNR, or how does money fit into this situation?
Yeah, and again, every site's a little different. In some cases, we are putting the fence up. Those are probably on the rarer side. What we'll often do in many cases is we'll put in like corner posts to make it easier for the producers. And then especially the people who are doing a lot of rotational grazing, things like that, they can get that fence put up and taken down. They've got reels on the back of their ATVs. They've got temporary fence posts. They can put one or two lines of hot wire up, or just smooth high tensile. They can get that fencing up and down pretty efficiently and pretty quickly. And so quite often it's the producer or whoever owns the cattle is taking care of that. But again, every site is going to be different, and I don't have any specific acres, linear feet, or dollar numbers for you.
Okay, because the other question that comes up then is, does that fence stay up or does it come down? And it sounds like most of the time it comes down. And then the type of fence, and I know this isn't your wheelhouse, but there's a WPA that I know of that I used to hunt a lot. And one year I drove by it and it had 4 strands of barbed wire and big cattle gates all around it. And, I was thinking to myself, okay, I understand doing some rotational grazing for a habitat disturbance, but to put 4 strands of barbed wire around a pheasant hunting tract, barbed wire to me as a guy with running labs and flushers, that's the enemy. And I understand letting the farmer or rancher get in there if he needs to be, but I want to push for pulling barbed wire out of all public lands as much as possible. So is there, from a managing agency standpoint, I know we'll go back to WMAs here, is there any sort of requirements when it comes to type of fencing out there?
Again, we do have some fencing standards. I'm kind of surprised to hear about the barbed wire.
Yeah.
There may have been some very specific reason for that I don't know and can't address. For the most part, we're doing almost entirely high tensile smooth fence.
Perfect.
Dogs can go right through it. And quite often it's taken down at the end of the year. I know one of the first things we often do when we do public land acquisitions is, we go in there and rip all that rusty barbed wire, and it's half buried in the ground, and that's part of it's part of what we do before we even open it to the public. Sure.
No, that's great. That's great. That barbed wire is just so damaging, can be so damaging to people too. and my hunting pants.
I've ripped a lot of boots.
Yeah, exactly.
I've gone to the vet at least once for that reason, and a couple of pairs of expensive waders myself. So.
Oh yeah, the waders. It's like they're magnets for barbed wire. It seems like. Well, let's talk a little bit about the disturbance in that habitat and how it can be good. And this wasn't on topic, but you brought it up, and I think it was Tom Landwehr was on the show one time, and he brought up the fact that going through a dry cycle can be good for wetlands. And, what is it? Because people get so worried, oh man, it's so dry this year. Gosh, the ponds are all dried up. And of course, we're looking at it from the standpoint of a hunter saying, I'm not going to be able to hunt that pond this year, or it's going to be just straight 2 feet of mud that I'm going to be walking through, and the dogs are going to be miserable. But when you talk, and I don't know if this is in your again wheelhouse, but can you talk a little bit about the benefits of a wetland drying up like that?
Yeah, I can dabble in that. We do have some wetland experts in Minnesota or in the DNR that you could bring on. Basically, and you may have heard about the wetland cycle and the hemi-marsh phase. One of the issues like I said, we've been in pretty much of a wet cycle since 93, 94. We kind of had a dry year in, 2012, 2013, somewhere in there, and then 21. We have a lot of wetlands that are kind of stuck in that end phase where it's, heavily encroached by cattails. It's not terribly productive. It's just been too waterlogged for too long. And that sounds totally counterintuitive, but wetlands can be too wet. Where if you dry them out, you expose that seed bank that, either on the surface of the mud or buried just below it, and you're basically resetting the wetland is what we call it in that cycle. And that's why we, some of our larger wetlands on both state and federal lands have water control structures. So even in a wet year, we can let all the water out and then put the boards back in and back the water back in. But yeah, it's just part of the cycle. In the perfect world, from a duck perspective and probably from a duck hunter perspective, you like that what they call the hemi-marsh stage, where it's about 50% emergent vegetation, 50% open water, and preferably, patches of emergent vegetation scattered throughout. It's not the east half is emergent vegetation and the west half is open vegetation. You want that real patchy nature because lots and lots of places for ducks to hide, especially broods of ducks, lots of invertebrates in those types of wetlands, so lots of food down in there. And just kind of trying to, there's some good pictures of that kind of that hemi-marsh or middle stage that we quite often try to manage for.
Well, let's get back into your area of expertise and talk about the prairie a little bit. Minnesota's had this prairie conservation plan for a number of years now, and talking about particularly the western side of Minnesota, pretty much from top to bottom. I really like it because I love the prairie. I love living out here in western Minnesota. Where are we at in that plan? Like, what's the status? How are things going with that?
Yeah, we still meet as a group several times a year. The plan is, there can be some misunderstanding about our state plans. It is very much an umbrella plan.
Sure.
It has some very broad-based goals. We still do a lot of work. Kind of the day-to-day stuff is, who happens to come into the office and say, hey, I'm interested in selling my land and leaving a conservation legacy, that sort of thing. Where we target a lot of our management, especially, the prairie plan is focused on kind of these core areas where we've got both clusters of remaining native prairie, as well as usually clusters of state and federal public lands. So those are going to be some of the best places, at least in my opinion, for both your upland pheasant hunting and for your waterfowl hunting, because that's where you're going to find the biggest blocks of habitat out there.
Well, I remember being at a prairie chicken event, and I think we were filming for Prairie Sportsman and running into you there. How are the prairie chickens looking nowadays? Have you been out there? Have you been around the chickens much lately?
I have not. Yeah, these days I live about halfway between Cambridge and Mora, and I can't remember. We did publish our most recent prairie chicken and sharp-tail report not too long ago, and I can't remember what the numbers were. We're generally speaking holding steady. Year-to-year fluctuations, as with anything in wildlife, but somewhat steady in recent years. We're still well below, there it is. Still well below, where we were even back in like the, 2005 to 2010 period, which is kind of when CRP was at its maximum, both in Minnesota and nationally. Sure.
Yeah, but that CRP, you can really watch the bird numbers, the populations just fluctuate with the numbers of CRP enrollment. Well, you're over in that eastern, that east central part. How we closed the sharp-tail season over there. Have people been seeing more birds? Is that helping? Are they coming back, or is it going to be just maybe we're too far gone in that part of the state for Sharpies?
Yeah, I don't know about Sharpies and, like the effects of closing the season. Those always, it's going to take a couple of years before we see any effects, if we do see any. I can tell you the pheasant populations up in this area are through the roof. I was out driving around, actually doing a lot of racing the last week, and there are broods of pheasants all over the place.
Oh, good.
In the winter, it's not unusual to see 40, 50, 100 pheasants just driving around. So it's an unknown. It's a bit of a secret, but there are a lot of prairie chickens over here in this kind of transition zone.
Oh, really? Prairie chickens?
Oh, really? I'm sorry, pheasants.
Pheasants. Oh, okay.
Lots of pheasants over here.
Oh, really?
I have not gotten up there, but I've heard Pine County is one of the new hot spots for pheasant hunting in recent years.
All the Pine County residents are just got mad at us.
Yeah.
Well,
Good.
No, that's great, honestly. And Jared Wickland from Pheasants Forever has been on a lot, and he's talked about that area. In fact, we filmed a pheasant hunt over there as well, just to kind of talk about the fact that you don't have to go to western Minnesota and southwest Minnesota to find birds. There are some other places to find pheasants around the state of Minnesota. It's a little different country. That's actually a really interesting part of the state, I think, there in that east central part of Minnesota. There's a lot of wildlife and some different habitat there, Greg.
Yeah, there's not the huge cornfields. Corn and soybean fields tend to be fairly small. Lots of grazing, lots of small pastures, and then just lots of brush and wetlands and sloughs and cattails and Yeah, there is a lot of wildlife in this part of the state.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. We don't get over there as often as we do, but every time we go over there, I'm always kind of surprised by something that we see. I remember we filmed a TV show on Grindstone. Was that the show we did? And we drove out there, and of course there were sandhill cranes. I think we saw pheasants. We saw all kinds of critters.
I don't know why you're looking at me.
You were there.
I don't think I was.
Weren't you there?
I don't
Oh, no, it was me and Dylan. That's right. And your dad. Well, we were with your dad. That's why.
Well, that's not me.
No,
I don't
it's
care
not.
what people say how similar we look. It's not me. I wasn't there just because my dad was
Well,
there.
usually when we film with your dad, you're there.
Well,
That's why
I wasn't.
I can't remember. It was
You're wrong.
Oh my gosh, it was so hot. I think the water temperature on Grindstone that day was like 90 degrees or something. It was absolutely. We spent more time swimming than we did fishing that day. But my point is, driving over there that morning, we saw a lot of critters along the road, and for something that close to the Twin Cities, that close to a major metropolitan area, to see that much wildlife was it was kind of cool. It was neat.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, you can be on the north side of the cities in about 45 minutes from this part of the world. So it's yeah. I mean, I can see. I mean, I've got woodcock galore. I've got ruffed grouse drumming right outside the bedroom window, and you can't
cool.
drive anywhere without seeing flocks of cranes and pheasants all over the roadside. So it's a fun place. It's a fun part of the state.
I won't make you answer this question. I won't put you on the spot about this, but we need to start looking at opening up a statewide sandhill crane season. I know that eastern population gets hunted in a number of states, and it's not going to make everybody happy that lives in the Twin Cities, I'm sure. But I would like to see it. We're starting to see cranes out here from that. I'm assuming they're from the eastern population, but we're seeing them spread out here into western Minnesota too. They're coming across the central part of the state. They're such cool birds. They're delicious. I think they're just fascinating. I've had a nesting pair the last couple of years right behind my house. I love the sound, waking up like bow hunting in the fall, climbing up in the stand in the morning, and then hearing the echo of that crane call. So cool. So anyway, I won't make you go down that road, but I'm just going to throw.
And I appreciate that. Out of my area of expertise.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you coming on and talking about all these other things that can get people's heart rate up just a little bit when it comes to habitat and public lands and things like that. But let's talk real quick. We're gonna wrap things up, but first let's talk. You have 4 books. You're an author. You have 4 books out there now, Greg?
Yeah, my first book was on prairie chickens, and then I did one on woodcock, wood ducks a couple years later, and then just last year, there you go. And just last year, had a book on just the prairie in general. That I apparently I haven't gotten you a copy of that. I will try to take care of that this winter.
I appreciate that. That's cool. Yeah, I mean, and they're just such neat birds, really, when you think about them. I mean, woodcock. Ruffed grouse. I've always joked that ruffed grouse are the unofficial state bird of Minnesota, especially when it comes to ruffed grouse hunters. But I feel like when the numbers have fluctuated a little bit, and we had a few years of down numbers for ruffed grouse, every grouse hunter became a woodcock hunter. And I feel like the woodcock numbers have been doing well, and of course they're migrating through. But they're pretty neat. They're strange little birds. I was going to call them neat little birds, but they're kind of strange little birds, aren't they?
Well, and they're just like they're just like our prairie grouse, our sharpies, and our chickens. I know Tom Carney, who writes Upland Almanac, has called them 2-season birds because they're just as, if not more, entertaining in the spring. I know I usually have 2, sometimes 3 woodcock sky dancing literally in my backyard.
Oh, cool.
The dog and I can take an evening walk, and we'll hear another 5, 6, 7 just a half-mile walk down the gravel road. And it's just insanely entertaining to sit out there and watch and listen to those guys in an April evening.
Well, and that along the same lines, the watching prairie chickens on the booming grounds in the spring has definitely become one of my favorite things to do in the spring. I don't get to do it as often as I want, but the first time I did it up at blue stem in Glendon, like my head exploded. Sitting there watching these birds. It was so cool. It was so much fun to watch. And there was, like a mink, I think, ran through the lek while we were there. There was deer walking by. You see everything when you're out there. But just seeing how those prairie chickens interact. And that one of the times we went, and I was with Brian Winter, and we saw the king of the lek, the one that had the center of the lek, had this he was just this big red patch on his chest, much redder and darker than all the other ones. And he just had this attitude to him. He was the king. And there was all these other males out there trying to attract all these females. And they wanted nothing to do with all the other ones. They wanted, what did we call him? We had a nickname for him. I can't remember what we called him now, but Copper, maybe that's what Brian called him. But he was neat, but at the same time, in the far back corner, there was one, he must have had a broken leg or something, and he was back there hopping around on one foot, trying to do his best dance he could, and we were all rooting for him. But I don't know, it's such a fascinating display, and of course that spot in particular there's always so many birds there. It's a neat one to go to, but man, those spring courtship displays, sharp tails, prairie chickens, they're just such neat displays to see.
Yep.
So
and there's I know I've so many questions. I can remember one morning I was out surveying. The chickens were right up against the fence line, and there was a red-tailed hawk sitting on the fence post just feet away, and nobody cared. And I also remember this was up at Hamden Slough National Wildlife Refuge. I was leading a birding tour with the Detroit Lakes Bird Festival. And literally 3 minutes before the bus tour got there, a peregrine falcon stooped on the lek. And I mean, you're supposed to be out there, rooting for the prairie chickens, but that was pretty cool to see. He didn't get one, but it was pretty cool to watch.
Nature interacting, man. It's like watching the Discovery Channel in real life. I think it's cool.
Yep.
And I saw something. We were driving around scouting for doves the other day, or I was, I guess, and there was like 4 doves on a power line and a hawk sitting on the power pole like 3 feet away from him. just hanging out. It was it's always cool to see. But all right, Greg, where can people find your books if they want to purchase one?
They can, just go to Amazon.com is probably the quickest spot, or they can go to the University of Iowa Press, buy them directly there.
Very good. Greg Hoch, DNR Prairie Habitat Supervisor. Good luck with everything this fall. Thanks for being on the show. I appreciate it.
Thank you for the invite.
Sporting Journal Radio is a division of Macaba LLC. If you've got a question, comment, or story idea for us, send us an email. Go to sportingjournalradio.com. While you're there, you can learn how to advertise on the show and visit our store for hats, hoodies, coffee mugs, and more. Go to sportingjournalradio.com.